how DPIs, which was intended to provide tools of governance and social welfare, have instead resulted in furthering exclusion, civil deaths, coercions, and even mortality. At the heart of this conversation was also the question of consent, what role it plays in the broader context of DPI implementation. But crucially, what emerged was that consent was treated as a necessary means in coverage under the DPI project rather than a mechanism that ensures fairness. With this, I am honored to introduce DPI and Privacy. As CEO of the Open Knowledge Foundation, she advocates for open data policies and technologies that promote equitable access to knowledge. She advises governments and international organizations on policies and digital infrastructure strategies. A former Stanford HAI fellow and an the Center for Internet and Society at CNRS, her research focuses on commons-based governance models for digital public infrastructure and AI. She has led legal and advocacy initiatives defending freedom of expression, privacy, and access to information, as well as the defense of whistleblowers. She serves as an expert member of the UN Working Group on Data Governance at all levels and is a board member of Open Future and the Whistleblower Network, Germany. Thank you, Ms. Avila, for joining today's session and helping us further this vital conversation. Over to you now.
Oh, thanks to you, your organization has been, since the early days of my career, a source of inspiration and guidance, actually. Unlike my country, your country, India, is quite unique because it is, of course, very complex and deeply unequal, and in some aspects deeply undemocratic, but unlike mine, has the ability to build the technology we dream. And that is thanks to the effort, a consistent effort through decades of math and skills, and the hard work of so many professors and so many parents, enabling education of some very privileged people at scale. And that I always marvel about it, because unlike India, in Latin America, where I come from, especially Central America, we are so far behind from a plan to allocate the skills to navigate this future. However, of course, and that's what we are going to talk about, instead of gathering all hands to build a different vision, and the same way that India did when it was leading the non-aligned movement, build a third way of doing and living in this digital sphere. It is like disperse and feed it into a system, a two-way system that is only increasing the things that we do not want to see reproduced at scale in the world. So today, I just wanted to share the admiration that I have for India, their people beforehand, because I'm going to be maybe a little bit harsh and critical in some of the aspects of this discussion. It comes from a place of love, it comes from a place of admiration, and it comes from a desperate attempt at making people wake up of the wonderful ability that you have, so we can reverse course and build something better. So that said, I'm going to start sharing my screen and sharing some slides. I apologize that I'm using big tech to mediate this, but can you see it well? So the title of my presentation,
yes,
defending privacy as a fundamental right in the era of DPI. And something happened to me, I would say like 5 years ago, I started hearing more and more and more the word of infrastructure to refer of everything that we were doing. We were using it before, but it didn't took off as a term until it did in a massive way. And when we used to, we didn't used to put very different technologies in a same bucket the way that those framing digital public infrastructure are doing today. And digital public infrastructure doesn't have a uniform term. There's some definitions in the G20 documents or definitions by UNDP, but it doesn't have a consolidated terminology. And sadly, and it's something that I would like to address in this talk, sadly, it has been reduced if we want to see it in the way that many countries conveniently are seeing it. It has been absolutely narrowed and reduced to 4 issues like identification, payment system, data exchanges, and a form of consent. It has been to something that can be if we think broadly of the digital public infrastructure the same way that we thought in the past of bridges and even the postal system, it could be something so versatile, and it could be something that could expand so much more than just the narrow meaning that some want to give it. For the purpose of this talk, I want to not to stick myself into this extremely narrow vision, but I also want to highlight why privacy is especially relevant if the development going forward of digital public infrastructure is just in these very, very, very narrow categories. I come from a country that has struggled. Do I need to? Is it shown big, or do I need to maximize the screen? I just want to know if you're seeing.
It's fine for me. We can also, I think I'm able to control I can put it on full screen myself as well. But it's
Yeah. So
visible as
if
of
it
now.
is, okay,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have. It's just more guidance into the topic. But so in this way that it has been framed so narrowly, I am very concerned, because when we were starting to unpack privacy as a right that was always it was an important issue there, but it was at the unprecedented risk because of the scale of erosions that the adopting specific technologies could lead to, and the centralized power that very few companies and governments were exercising over us. All the red flags, actually, or not most of the red flags, are related to this very narrow approach of the 4 aspects that digital public infrastructures want to address. How do we identify ourselves? How we transact? How our data flows, usually one way. And then that should have been enough to raise all the alarms in the privacy and data protection movement. But it didn't. To me, it was very interesting that it didn't, because it was 2 steps far removed from the usual topics and activities and litigation that we are usually engaged in. Why? Because we usually, in the spaces, are very concerned with what companies are doing in our countries, or a specific program that is run through in our city, we call it cameras and surveillance. Or it did a lot locally in India with Aadhaar, but that conversation didn't reach the technicalities, specific technicalities around privacy and why this was concerning, didn't reach mainstream outside. And we will hear, like, it was just some examples on when you deploy biometrics the wrong way and so on. But it caught us by surprise, to many, when we saw that it was not just a localized problem, but a localized problem with the potential to scale and be reproduced in the most vulnerable countries around the world. And the problem that we face as well, when we want to try to advance a right and to preserve a right, is that it is, and we have seen it a lot in other spaces, such as digital trade. We are seen as the enemies of development. We are seen as the ones, the privacy and data protection people trying to push for a rights frame. We are seen as the people who will take away the opportunity of development and transaction and access to service to people. That's the first thing. And seeing, for example, UNDP as the entity behind, and World Bank as well, the entities behind these processes, we want countries to be able to, people, like, usually they tell these stories of the small person in a rural location who was able to finally transact and have a bank account and have access to health and so on. The problem is that usually, the narrative is very compelling, and we do not have the time to counter narrative with the stories of harm, and stories of harm at scale. And the stories of harm at scale only come when the systems are already running, and where we need to go through very complex litigation and against a machinery that's already in place. And so the things that I'm observing, that many of the digital public infrastructures push out today, is not an exclusive problem of India, but of many pushing forward, is data collection, and aggressive data collection, aggressive and untransparent data collection at scale, opacity, and all connected, the pieces connected, give a very accurate picture of all the activities a person is doing at any given moment to the government, and not only to a government, to the governments that government is sharing data with. And that's a very scary take, because I am usually inclined to think the way that Dr. Shoshana Zuboff thinks. If something has the capacity to surveil and control, it will surveil and control. And you can tell me that there's very sophisticated laws and enforcement offices with all the safeguards here and there. If something is that designed and has the capability of massive data collection that can be then transformed in a system of control, it will be transformed in a system of control. And it is like what I have seen in the systems that are showcased globally. Many of the systems of identification and payment and data transfer that I have seen is they have in the design. They are designed not for minimal data collection, but for maximal data collection. And not only data collection, it's what happens. It is very unclear what is going to happen with all this data being collected. And something that is very interesting, it is, we many times do not know the insights of an application because we are ignorant of all the dependencies of all the pieces of software here and there that are connected to build a system. Nothing anymore is built from scratch. And so many times, even if the core code of one of these public infrastructures looks okay, it is when it is operating, when it is connected to a cloud server, when it is connected to other systems, when it becomes problematic. So some engineer can vouch and say, like, this is not going to be problematic, but in itself, it is when it's connected in a system that it becomes problematic. And so in the past, and in all the years of advocacy on privacy, we were always saying that we should engineer systems so they do not collect data that is not essential to their function. That's not happening in the case of DPI. We also promoted that if we are collecting data, the system should be fully free, transparent, modifiable, inspectable by the public. But what we have seen in the case of DPIs in many contexts is that it is impossible to audit, or it is like, somehow technically auditable with a, white paper. Okay, it is good. It has like the mechanisms. I want to see I want to see independently what is happening when the technology connects the social, when the social connects the political, because we cannot audit a massive system that is collecting the biometric data of an entire nation. We cannot only audit the technology, we need to audit the whole system of deployment. We need to audit and keep a vigilant eye on the politics, the dynamics, the power struggles inside the system, the policies, who is enforcing the policies, and who is blocking the auditability. And the other important aspect that is very relevant for this privacy conversation is that DPIs are not standalone systems. We are heavily dependent on cloud. And cloud is a tricky word here, because we, like, for example, if my country, Guatemala, that has been considering adopting DPI for IDs, locally doesn't have the capacity as a government to host this. I mean, even our electoral system is depending on foreign clouds. So even if a system having all the biometric data of an entire nation is hosted on someone else's cloud, someone else's computer, we know which rules apply to most of the clouds. Is the rules of two countries that are not necessarily, beacons of democracy and do not love privacy. So that is an added risk. One of the tensions that I face when dealing with this topic is when, of course, there's a good side. I mean, okay, people need to identify. Well, this debatable if people need to identify it or just to check identity. Like, it's a big debate on how the global identity system should look like. But usually is the question: are we building infrastructure that empowers or a system that surveils? And the reality is, and I have seen all the MOUs, and all the plans of many countries very excited in adopting technology to mediate their identities and so on, is that most of these platforms are operating in the absence of strong privacy laws or even technical capacity, local capacity to conduct independent audits, real-time redress for harm, or even, the strong civil society / social arm, ombudsman arm to enforce rights in case of harm. And what I'm seeing that DPI is having as an effect is a scaling control in already fragile democracies. And is this rush, like I have a personal story. It's imagine we already had a perfect biometric system in place in Guatemala. In Guatemala right now, Guatemala is one of the, where I come from, Central America, is one of the most under attack diasporas in the US, facing deportation and even encouraged to self-deport. And now, imagine if the country trying to get rid of the citizens of my country just it has access to the biometric database. Now, the IC, these authorities running a system to scan the faces of people in supermarkets, in crop fields, everywhere in the streets, to match and identify those who are like deportable. Now we know from Aadhaar and other experiences how failed, how full of glitches biometric technologies are. Here we are like facing the possibility of sending, of deporting people, removing them from their home into indefinite detention because of biometric data being shared. I mean, in the case of my country, of course, they are willing to share. But that's the point. That the point is that when you have a centralized system with all your citizens, it becomes a leverage point. And we are living in very dangerous times where many countries want to, let's call it what it is, like an white supremacy is back. And if you are in the wrong side of the chromatic scale, basically, the way you look places you as a subject of less rights. All the things that we were fighting against, like let's not have centralized databases. Let's collect just the data that you need so I can exercise my rights. All of that seems forgotten, and everybody has fallen for two words that I really don't like: efficiency and development. Under the flags of efficiency and development, they are trading away our privacy, and above all, trading away the privacy of these very vulnerable citizens that are, doing what they can to earn a living in a hostile context. So that's in the political part of DPI is what, like, on top of the technical design that ignore all the learnings of the privacy movement on how to minimize data, minimize metadata, reduce dependencies, and preserve sovereignty, so you can really protect the data of your citizens. It seems to have ignored conveniently the political landscape today, and how this data becomes a strategic asset that not necessarily your own country, but other countries want to get hold of on. And in some contexts, like in my reality, like if I think many of the Caribbean countries are trying to adopt this technology, very fragile democracies, like in one moment it flips and the safeguards are ignored and the data has been already collected. So political opponents are simply kicked out of systems because we already, the way that the technology is configured today is very susceptible of profiling. And now we have seen in the Indian stack concretely, the Indian stack is a very interesting case because it is a little bit, when we were thinking the Global South should have their own things, I didn't think of the idea of one super powerful Global South country finding that solution and exporting it everywhere. It is not the way that we do things in the Global South. In the Global South, we don't look out. We look at our communities first, and we look at the needs of the communities, and based on the needs of the communities and the constraints and the skill gaps, we do what we can as best. Then we can share and put in common our learnings and strategic leaps that we have found in what we do, and then share, put in common these learnings, and someone else will adapt them as they see fit. But this kind of franchising, as we franchise, fast food chain, of technology that has been developed by a country with a very different reality, capacity and reality than countries that it is intended to serve in terms of scale, culture, and so on. To me, it raises concerns, and it raises concerns because it is not offering. It offers something that might be like scalable and increase efficiency and increase market revenues and state control. It is the way that I have seen it in practice is like it is aggregating and augmenting power of the already powerful actors in our societies, private sector and the government in many cases, and most of all private and banking sector. So it's a tremendously sad missed opportunity, because the power that we wanted to augment and the agency that we wanted to lift is not of the private sector in the developing countries. They are already very well connected with two global systems. Or the government in some contexts that it's already working together with private sector, not necessarily for the good of everybody else. So when we talk about privacy, of course, it's the best interest of elites, economic elites, and political elites to have the poorest of the poor identified, all their movements and all their habits, capturing data, the connections between them absolutely mapped, and so they are predictable, therefore easy to manage, easy to govern in ways that might be outside. We might not even know the mechanisms of control and suppression that's a system that knows what you buy, who you are, which benefits you are dependent on, knows. So it is a very scary, and it's not only the case of India. It is other pieces that might be problematic. So we know, you know better than me, all the problematics with the biometric architecture of Aadhaar, also the UPI metadata traces. But something that I wanted, to emphasize is two aspects that for privacy are very relevant. One is the commercial foreign cloud providers. What kind of sovereignty, what kind of national system are we talking about? As I mentioned earlier, if it's hosted somewhere else, I guess that there is really where the big business of DPI is, with the cloud. Because even, very rich and powerful countries even Europe cannot sort their own cloud without depending on very few concentrated companies. And the second thing that I'm concerned about is consent is eliminated from the equation, because once top-down systems are imposed to mediate whether you have access to food or not, consent is just a formality, because you consent to eat or not to eat. So the aspects of human dignity and free informed consent that need to be is a precondition of any relationship of a more powerful actor with you and your data is eliminated. And the other things, that I think that all over the world there's this excitement. Okay, I can pay from my mobile. I don't have to carry my ID. I just need to carry my face. Oh, it's also convenient and so glossy. Ignoring things like hard-learned lessons that we have seen across the years. I mean, it seems that everybody forgot what Edward Snowden revealed to us, and it seems that the repressive mechanisms of some governments have been reminders that we are not connecting enough with the conversation, such as the ICE raids. the danger is really there, and it is more data-driven than ever, is that we need to prevent data collection when it's not necessary. We need to adopt data minimization as an imperative. And we need to preserve people's anonymity. And instead of increasing opacity, because okay, they might show me the code of the app, but they will never show me the contract that they signed with the cloud provider, is that we are not really, we are like open washing many times as opacity is only increasing. So I am really worried of this disconnect of communities that fought and litigated for a long time for a completely different approach, and then now a massive initiative with a lot of money behind that is building just the opposite of what, like, 15 years or more of tech and privacy litigation and public interest research shown us. And so I think that going forward, I don't want to be like just negative, but I am afraid that I cannot be positive when something is really bad. I think that we need to ask them, those promoting DPIs, uncomfortable questions. And one of the uncomfortable questions is, why are you calling it public? It's just because it's state-owned, it's state-provided. Because in our spaces and in our communities, public is something is public when it's governed somehow, to some degree, by the public, and is not hidden on the proprietary contracts, on paid cloud agreements. The other thing is all the efforts to look good, to say like, oh, of course we are like right preserving, and we really care about privacy. It's like when I read the Google notice, we really care about privacy. We have like taking all these measures. Usually, when the explanations on how the systems care about the privacy of the users, because we kept that term, we keep using user instead of referring to people, is we shouldn't be satisfied with the checklist that many push out. Privacy is not privacy compliance on privacy is not a checklist. Data protection is not a checklist, and many times what it happens is it is a good analogy is when you have a new bridge and the engineers give it a go. Okay, according to the standards. Okay, it was built with the good materials. It all the checklist is okay. Okay, you can start using the bridge. But in real life, with real infrastructures, you have periodic evaluation. You want to know how the materials stand the storm. We want to know, you want to see if actually what it was reported was real, or if instead of using steel, they use some weak material. So, so the point that I want to make is privacy is not something static when we refer to digital public infrastructures. It evolves as technological leaps happen, as social transformations happen, as political earthquakes happen, that something that we thought that was built in and that was built to preserve rights might no longer be as stable and as good as it was promised. So it has to be like a dynamic process, and the way that now is being proposed and deployed and funded is not letting the minimal oversight after. Not even before, it is like the window that we have to discuss privacy is like basically government of Guatemala. I love to use my country because I can complain freely about it. The government of Guatemala decides on, okay, I will adopt the Indian stack. And do it for a payment system, and it's all good. We added additional safeguards here and there that make it even more private on the Indian version, blah blah blah, and then government, there's a coup. Government changes, like it has, I think that we should have, a red button on. We don't have a system that will not deliver a centralized database of everything to a bad actor if we build these systems, because the safeguards are safeguards in paper and not mechanisms that will remove control when the democratic environment is lost. And that's why, I believe, and that's not something that we have today, but that's something that is desirable, that privacy must be embedded in the design. Because we cannot leave it to compliance. We cannot leave it to enforcement. We have to be aware of the political conditions of the world today. And final remarks, I want us to ask ourselves, like global and local audience, what is our red line? What should we refuse to build? And which solutions that we build should not be exported in scale? That's a first question. I don't have the answer, but I do know that some professions, like doctors and people playing with genetics and so on, have red lines. And it seems that we in the space at the intersection of technology and society, we haven't been bold enough on the red lines of the systems that shouldn't be. Even we have the atomic agency, regulating some things, and we have some AI apocalyptic framings. But in these very simple systems that can completely destroy the lives of people, we don't have red lines. There's some systems, there's some data that shouldn't be collected. There's some systems enabling that collection that shouldn't be built or scaled or exported. The second is, how can we be better at placing our arguments in a way that is not seen as hostile, attacking development, attacking economic growth, attacking human development as it is framed? How can trust, transparency, and human dignity be placed above efficiency and growth? It is part of the same conversation, but it shouldn't be at the same level, in my opinion. And last, do we have the courage and the power to go against the current DPI tide and propose something better, propose something that is people-centric, rights preserving, auditable, and localizable? In that way, how can we push? I don't necessarily want to share my face and my economic transactions with everybody around the world, but I would love to share, for example, how the quality of air is affecting the lungs of my community. What about DPIs that shared in real time and connect the data points we need, instead that will make people's life better, instead of paving? How can we pave through digital, public, universal infrastructure, design the tech hacks that will enable us overcome the most pressing problems of our times, instead of just making things easier and friction free to the big corporations and the big banks? Those are my remarks, and I'm open for questions, commentary, and debate.
Thank you, Ms. Avila. We have a question. Yes. Etienne.
Hi.
Yes.
I'm Etienne with Article 19. Thank you so much for your presentation, Renata. It was very interesting. My question is around power and infrastructure. So when we think of digital infrastructure, like everything across the stack, hardware, networks, software, applications, is largely captured by big tech. That much we can agree on. But to what extent does DPI reinforce the power of big tech is my question. You mentioned cloud. Where are we seeing this concretely?
Okay, it is not only on cloud. In the little dependencies that behind a technology in order to be deployed, hardware, for example, hardware that we need to operate. The systems that many of the systems that those structures need to be plugged in rely on big tech infrastructure, even minimally, like, but more than just the aspect of the I mean, in the stack that you were describing, something that we often we do not see because it's not the way that it's framed from the powerful actors to us, is the political stack. And you have the politicians, like, and you have seen how there's a very cozy relationship between those in power, those with the power to deploy the infrastructures in the top down in the countries, and also the international financial mechanisms to fund those infrastructures. Something that we are not discussing enough is that at the IM conditionality for countries to access loans. Imagine that. So you are like, often you have like the shaking hands and taking the selfie with the big tech guy, and you deploy this, and then, oh, surprise, the cloud that you're using is the cloud to run all the systems of all your citizens, is the cloud from the guy in the, and I'm saying guy because usually guys, in the selfie. But it is the other more scary scenario, and it is like, okay, you're out of cash, you need a loan. Okay, we will give you the loan, but you don't have even an ID system and you don't have a payment system. You will not be able to grow the way we financial institutions want you to grow and be more interoperable with the rest of the economy. So we have a suggestion for you. On top of your loan, you will also get debt to pay for this system that will give you a digital payment infrastructure. So imagine you have a gun here. You want to pay your teachers this month. Okay, we give you money to pay your teachers this month because you ran out of money, but you have to implement this. So like the force and violence and big rush and push to adopt certain infrastructures is quite brutal. I wish, and I think that we should do the exercise of x-rays of a DPI on IDs, for example, and see to run, like to be operational, all the micro dependencies that it has, and the third party apps or plugins that it needs to be that would be like an interesting exercise of dependencies. I know that some people are doing to examine the dependencies of Europe, and apparently the result is so scary that they don't even want to share it. But I think that in the power equation, this is the aspect that in my research I have seen as the most scary. The political pressure at the highest levels to adopt as fast as possible something that will make transactions in the most populous countries smooth for those already in power.
Yes, I actually have a question, Ms. Avila. So my question, I can recall that you referred to Shoshana Zuboff's work on surveillance capitalism, and made me sort of think about how DPIs as a platform, as an infrastructure, it sort of differs yet remains similar to the private digital platforms that we are all using. So so from my question is, how do you think DPI differs yet remains similar to private digital platforms from the perspective of digital privacy and data protection?
To me, it is, and I'm sorry if I'm ignorant in like that, the deep details of public law in India. Apologies, it was my understanding after reading the articles in the legislation. It is even more scary because like a private company, I know that it has been super liberalized because of free trade agreements and so on, and they have free range of things that they can do. But the state has even more power and more exceptions on doing many things with the data they collect. They're less restricted and with a more ample sphere of action than a private actor, and that's what concerns me. First, you're handing over all of this to an entity that has the monopoly of force in a country and has all the means, at least more means than a company that can just be cancelled in a given country, and so scrutiny is somehow more difficult. And second, the thing is it's not a real divorce between the big tech that was problematic in the first place and is not independent and sovereign, let's say, like homemade, homegrown, and kept inside. It is actually a public-private partnership, and where the private actors are either foreign and have very strong ties with to foreign capital.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Avila. I think we have a question from Sanjana. If you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah. Hi everyone. Namaste. I'm Sanjina from Nepal. I have been working in an organization called Digital Rights Nepal, and I have some question related to this. First of all, thank you so much for the insightful presentation, Renata. As I said, I am joining from Nepal. We have already introduced foundational DPI elements like national identity card and some other digital service platforms as well. Also, to give the context, Nepal government has also released a draft data protection policy, but still lacks some right-based safeguards as well. My question is around as we move toward greater interoperability between the systems, maybe inspired in part by India's DPI model as well. My question is, what safeguards or governance models should countries like Nepal should prioritize in the early stage of the development to avoid some long-term structural risks related to users' privacy and also the meaningful consent? I hope my question is clear.
Yes, it's very clear. When the things are already underway, it is not an easy position. I think that one of the things one of the key things is that all the contracts with the providers that will implement the DPI should be transparent, automatically transparent. And I guess I would like even before signature, who will provide the cloud, under which conditions, for example. I just that's not a solution, but at least sheds a light on what is really going on with the data, because something that it is not clear from the way that DPIs are adopted and implemented is, okay, there's a lot said about data collection, and then there's silence about data reuse, which components are to which dependencies the data is being shared, and how long, for which purposes, and the data is going to be used to train systems, which systems, by whom. Should it be should be just should be a subject to a referendum of the people, whose the data is being collected to even use it to train a system. I think that it's not an easy task to design a safeguard that is not embedded in the. I'm more favorable to the idea of embedding the safeguards in the design, as we have seen the design of the in the stack doesn't fulfill the requirements of data minimization and minimal data collection, but the opposite. So what you can patch when the system already has the capability of doing so many things is just have as many control points as possible during the whole cycle of the DPI, and a mechanism to shut it down in case of proven harm. To shut it down and an effective redress mechanism, and even an effective mechanism to interim shutdown. And I think the second thing is that the people shouldn't be like forced into a system. There should always be an option to that system.
Thank you, Ms. Avila. I hope, Sanjana, that answers your question. If we have any other questions, we have another question in the chat box from Pranesh. What do you see as the distinction between DPI and digital public goods? Can something that isn't open source be called DPI, as India is doing with the most of its DPIs like UPI? Also, the participation of the private sector as informal advocates, as consultants, as volunteers, as users of the core APIs, or even as self-regulatory civil society institutions is an important feature of the DPI phenomenon. What is an ideal model for these various kinds of participation?
And to the first question, I don't think that should be considered a digital public good. You know, like I think that the concept of the digital public good as replacing somehow in the vocabulary of many the digital commons framing is problematic, but in the way that I understand digital public goods, it shouldn't fit because of precisely what you are highlighting, Pranesh, that something that is not open shouldn't be qualified as such, because something that is not open is not accountable. And if it's not accountable, we couldn't have, like, mechanisms to govern it. And the second thing on the participation of the private sector, I mean, is a well-known reality on the revolving doors between private sector and government in many countries. I mean, mine, for example. And the problem is the ongoing problem is that we do not have that open door, and we do not have an equal seat at the table in the relationship that usually gives birth to these mega projects of technology that is paid with our taxes. There's I don't know if that can be solved with a conflict, a very robust conflict of interest frame, and how it will be like, how will it will be like I think, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but it's a difficult question because I know that in practice, like ultimately they sit down at an informal lunch and they decide, they as the powerful economic elites and powerful political elites, infected by very utopian techno solutionism and big interest in their pockets. And the way to neutralize it, maybe, and it's just an idea now in the conversation, maybe I have to think more about it, is having an autonomous institution or a group of autonomous institutions that you have to run through these decisions. a little bit like the way that you cannot like build anything in real space. You shouldn't be like able to build anything and deploy anything in the technology space if it is not like approved, like not only on safety grounds, but many other considerations by an actor, an institution that doesn't have a stake on it, like that doesn't have, that is truly independent from the technological decisions that have been pushed forward. I don't know if that exists even. I know that there's like some algorithmic audits and so on, but what I will feel comfortable with is having a well-paid multidisciplinary team, having the ability to say no, this is not going to be possible because it's against our economic sovereignty, it's against privacy, it is not really unlocking competition, and is harmful for the environment. Ideal world again, but it would be like nice to have somebody with enough power and to stop this kind of systems from going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Avila. Yeah, Etienne has responded to Pranesh's question. Even DPGs can be used to build problematic DPIs, for example, MOSIP. Yeah. In any case, thank you everyone for joining this session today and participating and asking questions. If there's any other question anyone would like to ask, now's the time.
Before the questions, I will love to just add some remarks. I think that the idea of, I think that the vision of sharing the good things, the good solutions that can improve people's lives is great. For example, if some country or some initiative has a great tool to detect wildfires, how wonderful to put it in common and share it and share practices and tackle a pressing issue. What I want to urge those here is, while we criticize the current super narrow rights eroding approach of DPI, let's counter the narrative with a different approach to digital public infrastructures that could, that could really resolve problems, that could really create interoperable platforms of dialogue, that could really deliver good. As I said at the beginning, some countries and contexts had like all the elements in place, and how good will it be to put it in common and share and localize it and appropriate it in ways that that can deliver good. So I don't want to be like just on the super apocalyptic framing, but I think that that's possible, and that I would be like super happy if it's funded with public money, and it is, if countries are pushed to adopt it as opposed to structures of surveillance and control.
Thank you, Ms. Avila. And yeah, I think if there aren't any further questions, then we have reached the end of our session today. Thank you, especially Etienne, Sanjana, and Pranesh for joining the session, and everyone who's in attendance today. Thank you again, Ms. Avila, who you've chosen to take time out of your busy schedule and helped us understand that amongst all possible safeguards, embedding privacy at the core of digital public infrastructure is the need of the hour. We hope to see you all again tomorrow for day 3 of DPI In Conversation, where we will be joined by SFLC.IN's legal director, Mr. Prashant Sukatan, Ashish Agarwal from NASCOM, Desiree Kanchanjay from Co-Develop, and Sai Purori Rahul from Force United. Till then, goodbye. See you all again soon.